at this grave juncture in their lives. Their sacrifices shall always be remembered and spoken of in glowing terms by a grateful nation. In the end, I pay my solemn homage to my 5 fallen colleagues and brothers from the armed forces and civilians who have tragically lost their lives in Operation Sindoor. Our hearts go out to the bereaved families, and we express our solidarity to them in this lifetime and beyond, at this grave juncture in their lives. Their sacrifices shall always be remembered and spoken of in glowing terms. We have earlier today sent another hotline message to my counterpart, highlighting these violations of the understanding between the DGMOs on the 10th of May, and our firm and clear intent to respond to these fiercely and punitively, if repeated tonight, subsequently, or later. In this regard, I must inform all of you that the Chief of Army Staff has earlier today conducted a security review and has granted full authority to our Army commanders for counter actions in the kinetic domain in case of any violation by Pakistan. We have thus far, ladies and gentlemen, exercised, and my colleague Pramod highlighted this, immense restraint, and our actions have been focused, measured, and non-escalatory. However, any threat to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and safety of our citizens will be met with decisive force. Jai Hind. Okay, so I'll answer the latter part of the question first. I also want to add that while the initial ceasefire agreement, as you correctly pointed out, is of the 2003 vintage, but I must remind you that in 2021, in the month of February, and this was then when the crisis in eastern Ladakh was also on, the 2 DGMOs had spoken and arrived at a ceasefire understanding that lasted right up until this unfortunate attack at Pahalgam. Once our Foreign Secretary had announced the decisions of the CCS in the immediate wake of that attack, he had announced certain measures, and then of course Pakistan had in turn made its own announcements. Since then, there have been certain violations of this ceasefire understanding, and of course after the 7th of May, like I pointed out during my statement, that there have been numerous violations on the line of control especially, and of course along the international boundary by the Pakistan Army and the Pakistan Air Force. This understanding that we spoke about yesterday, no, it was not for 3 days. It was first to stop aggressive and hostile activities immediately, let that order and direction settle down for about 36 hours, and thereafter discuss modalities, like I said, to ensure its longevity. That is tomorrow on the 12th of May. But unfortunately, we had a violation starting at approximately 1900 hours last night, and we've sent a communique, like I said, to the Pakistan Military Operations Directorate, and we will await what happens tonight.
All right.
The cost escalation, I'll leave it to your best imagination. I've already said that the response will be fierce and punitive. So I'll answer the question about the loss of lives on the other side. Of course, there are various means to ascertain that number there is information from various agencies that come in. There are, of course, on the line of control, other ways to find out as to what has been the effect of what you are doing there in ceasefire violations. So therefore, I mentioned 35 to 40 on the line of control, and please remember that once Operation Sindoor was launched, the responses of the Pakistan Army were also on Indian Army or the Indian Armed Forces infrastructure. Let me put it that way. So that's why I did not cover casualties of the Pakistan Army, at least in the initial phases of battle, because those were not our targets. Our targets were terror oriented, and of course later, once they launched air intrusions and air operations on our infrastructure, we've used heavier weapons, and of course there would have been casualties, but those are still being assessed. So you're speaking of the targets that I mentioned in the wake of the attack at Pahalgam, right? Yeah, I think it's amply clear to everybody here that the Pakistan Army has not crossed the international boundary, neither in the plain sector nor on the line of control. So the intrusions have been in the air. There have been certain attempts on the line of control when ceasefire violations have been on to try and infiltrate and carry out and perpetrate activities that we are all very well familiar with. Whether these are by terrorists or by the Pakistan Army or its special forces and commandos is difficult to say, but each of these have been effectively thwarted. So therefore, as far as engagements of military targets on the other side is concerned, I thought Air Marshal Bharti covered those very well and in detail, and he also mentioned as to how they went about targeting those. I think those images were very clear and very, very graphic in telling us as to what we needed to hit. And you'll remember that right at the outset I said that we even went into what was the construction in each of these locations, and therefore decided on the vector that had to be utilized.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the US will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.